Welcome to It's Alive, where we host a space every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, to talk about developments in the world of UBI and meet with the people behind the headlines. I'm Scott Santons. I've been researching, writing, and advocating for the concept of UBI since 2013. For those who know the concept, UBI stands for Unconditional or Universal Basic Income. It's the idea that every individual in a society can and should be guaranteed a periodic cash payment without means test or work requirement in order to make their way in the world upon a firm foundation. I recently started the Income to Support All Foundation, or ITSA Foundation, which provides support to projects that aim to make UBI a reality through research, storytelling, and implementation. You can learn more at itsafoundation.org. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Conrad Shaw and Josh Worth, co-founders of Comingle. They're here as UBI Guy and Comingler One. Comingle is one of the first projects we're promoting at the ITSA Foundation. Josh, do you want to tell people what Comingle is all about?
Yeah, Comingle is a money-sharing app we're developing that allows people to pool a percentage of their income into a community fund that gets divided up evenly and distributed as a weekly basic income. The result is that members give money when they have it and get money when they need it, so that no member ever goes a week without income. You can learn all about it at comingle.us.
Thanks, Josh. Conrad, do you want to add anything?
No, I'm just racing around these days trying to tie all these projects together. Nothing new to report. So let's jump into the news.
All right. Yes, we don't have a special guest today. It's maybe someone will pop in, but today we'll just be really just talking about the news. So kind of a last week in UBI like we like to cover. So I guess to start off, I think like the thing that really caught my eye, and this was because like I'm always trying to keep my eye out for studies, and then so when I see a study that I somehow missed, um, I'm happy that I finally found it, uh, but I'm also just kind of surprised that I missed this one since in relation to stuff, anyways. So what I missed that was published in late 2022, actually, in December 2022, was a scoping review of income support policies and firearm violence prevention. So, this scoping review, I mean, he was just looking at, just all the literature they could find out there, all the studies they could find that somehow tied gun violence to income-based policies to see if there is any correlation there. And it found 4 studies. So, this looked at a lot, but it found 4. So here's just a summary of this that I'll share. So, the researchers found 4 studies that specifically examined the relationship between income support policies and firearm violence. And of those, 3 were conducted in the US and 1 was in Brazil. All 4 found associations of policy relevant magnitude between income support policies and reductions in risk of interpersonal firearm violence. So just quick snippets from each study. The one study, it showed a 1 standard deviation or 10.11% increase in percentage of the precinct population receiving public assistance was associated with 10.53 fewer homicides per 100,000 for young adults and 2.9 fewer homicides per 100,000 for adults over the study period. So to just kind of translate that, make that simpler, there was just a significant reduction that did impact young adults more than adults, but it did impact both.
Do they have that in some sort of a percentage form? Because to me, 3 or 10 or whatever out of 100,000 doesn't mean a lot without like the what it normally is. Like how much of their. I
Well,
assume if they're calling it a significant reduction, it was. But yeah,
yeah,
weird percentages.
I'd have to spend more time looking into this report right now to find that specific number. But, just headline number is that there was a significant decrease. And, if it was 10.53 fewer homicides per 100,000, I would guess that it's somewhere around, like, I don't know, 15 or homicides usual or, something like that. But I don't know. That just kind of is kind of usual numbers, I think. But yeah, just interesting to see that it was significant. So study two, this was the Brazil one. So this was looking at bolsa familia. Bolsa familia being their kind of guaranteed income policy, although it's conditional. So it's like a large conditional transfer that's tied to education and vaccination status, and it reduces poverty, quite a bit in quite a large percentage of people in Brazil did receive this. So here's the quote. Bolsa Familia coverage had the most pronounced effect on firearm homicides and in the anticipated direction. The investigators stated that while it may not help reduce the incidence of all homicides, it robustly reduces the incidence of firearm homicides specifically. So that makes sense. When we talk about basic income, and we've seen other studies that looked at reductions of crime, like overall crime, like in Namibia went down by 42% in overall crime. And the Dolphin experiment went down 15%. We're not saying that basic income will reduce all crime, and just here it didn't reduce all homicides, but it did reduce homicides, and it did appear to be disproportionately gun homicides.
So
I would think it would reduce all crime, but not like mitigate all, not like get rid of all crime. But I would expect all like knife homicide, all kind of homicides would go down. So maybe it's interestingly worded there that it didn't reduce all. I would think it would reduce all homicide, or it begs the question anyway. Like, what do they actually mean? But
I think it's a fairly safe thing to say that if you've got a little money, you're less likely to want to shoot somebody. Like, it's kind of like it just sometimes when you're
stab
broke,
or
you're
drown
like, I
somebody.
want to shoot somebody. Like, I know the feeling. I don't do it, but it's like that feeling doesn't happen as much when you got some money. So.
Yeah, and it's weird how I see a lot of responses to stuff like this that I'm kind of surprised by it, and especially it kind of comes from the left actually, and so it seems to be mostly those on the left who reply to any post that I have that involves reductions in crime from basic income, and they can even get kind of upset about like the implication that that those in poverty, will have higher rates of crime, and they'll say, "Oh, well, rich people do crime too, so why are you blaming poor people?" And it's like, no, it's not about that. It's just the reality of the situation being that people do resort to crime out of desperation, and that this desperation is a result of poverty oftentimes, and it can also be just stress, insecurity. You see like how inequality itself increases crime rates, and decreasing inequality can improve that. So that to me is when I see someone say, it may not reduce, everything, but it does have certain impacts, and that's what this is saying too. We don't expect everything, but there are certainly certain types of crimes that can be reduced and prevented by basic income.
It's funny that reaction too from the left. It's like out of seemingly an impetus to like protect the integrity or whatever of people of lower income by saying, don't say that about all poor people, and we're not. It sort of is defeating the purpose of their own intent. It's sort of like actually categorizing people into like makers and takers. It sort of kind of gives away the actual paternalistic superior thought process of people when you don't accredit circumstantial stuff like poverty to the effects that it has on people, then you really are saying they're poor people, not people in circumstances of poverty, and you're sort of nixing discussion about it as if we don't talk about how inferior people in that situation are because they're inferior people. We just that's our solution is to not talk about it, and then they turn around and treat some sort of data that's like, no, it really isn't a character thing. It's a lack of cash that drives a lot of these things, and to somehow be offended by that is a little bit. It's a weird twist of logic.
Yeah, I think people are
That's
sort
it.
of like, they're being protective of like not wanting to demonize people of
Yeah.
lower incomes, like making that there's some sort of, that evil arises from, people in these circumstances. But yeah, it's like if you don't have a clear understanding of what the circumstances are, then how can you like hope to try to fix it?
But that's what's so surprising to me, or like endlessly sort of funny to me, I guess, in a dark way, is that some of the most demonizing and paternalistic and sort of like uh, us and them rhetoric type stuff actually comes from the left in the guise of like we need to help those poor people, and it doesn't really acknowledge people as inherently dignified and of worth. It sort of takes a pitying tone, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it's worse to me in a lot of ways than some of the like strict accountability rhetoric of the right. Like I can talk to people on the right all the time and say, listen, man, I can point out. I mean, you can point out people that are in a bad situation because they're lazy, but I can also point out 5 times as many people who are in a bad situation through no fault of their own. And they'll acknowledge that. Like if we live in a world where you can be screwed and it's not your fault, then the whole premise of like American dream starts to fade away. And that's actually something you can say to people on the right more than you can on the left these days. I feel like the left is sort of lost the thread a little bit when it comes to that issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Okay, so the third study that they covered, quote, a one standard deviation increase in welfare spending was associated with 14% lower firearm homicide rates. So that's the U.S. context. So yeah, interesting finding that one standard deviation increase in welfare spending, 14% lower firearm homicide rates. A basic income that's a poverty level basic income, that's pretty large compared to traditional welfare spending. So according to that kind of result, then it's pretty significant potential reduction in firearm homicide rates. There, I would think maybe like 30, 40, 50% or something based on that finding.
It's funny. It just points to the idea that against like whatever everyone says about human nature, humans are inherently this or that bad quality. The overwhelming majority of people, maybe all, just want to sort of get by, want people to do fine, want to like nobody wants to be violent or competitive, and it's another sort of absurdity of trying to defend basic income. The fact that it basically ameliorates everything. It's not it is so fundamental to every single system we have because it is just the basic empowerment of people. It actually does make pretty much everything better. And so you get this response that,
Right.
you think it's some sort of panacea. It's like, first of all, no, there's still other stuff we need to do. But second of all, and that shouldn't discredit it.
Yeah.
It's sort of absurd that you have to like backpedal sometimes when people are like, oh, you think it's so good. And it's like, yes, actually, yes, I do. doesn't make me naive. It makes it a better policy than any of the shit we're doing.
Yeah, I can't remember if I included this in my like Spaceballs argument for basic income or not, but it is something that I think about just kind of like a visualization of like how do you explain to people in like a simple way like why basic income seems to have like such a large swath of positive effects. And I kind of imagine like there's like invisible uh, hands around like everybody's throat, and it's all just choking them, a little bit, and that's like normal. So normal is to have these like magical choking hands, and then the question is, well, why is it so good when you get rid of those hands? And like, well, of course, like it's not if you do that, if you're slightly choking people, then that's going to have all kinds of issues. And so, yeah, if you stop doing that, then of course there's going to be all kinds of positive responses.
Well, Scott, you see, people won't do anything with their lives if they're not being choked. Like,
Right.
there's all this sort of like kinetic energy that comes from the struggle that results from being choked. And if we take
Yeah.
advantage of that kinetic energy, we can really boost the GDP.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is its own like good argument. Like it's a kind of like a modest proposal argument where although it's like that already exists. So yeah, the modest proposal is we just lightly choke everybody to make sure that they can work harder. Yeah.
I just want to make sure if anyone just walked into the room that I feel like these days we have to clarify that this is sarcasm because there's a lot of people who actually believe this. I mean, and people that come from well-meaning all sides of the aisle that they'll kind of just look at you and say like, well, who's going to clean my toilet if they don't absolutely have to? It's like,
Right.
I don't know, people that you pay enough. Like money's still going to have value. People will always want more. It's just like if you rely on people starving potentially or at being at threat of that to come and do your shit jobs for you literally, then maybe take a look at yourself, how you see the world. It's,
Yeah, it's really weird how there's I don't know the percentage of this. It'd be interesting to see. Like, yeah, when you look at, say, gig laborers, look at those who are driving for Uber and Lyft, and those who are delivering for DoorDash, like these kinds of things. Income breakdown. Who are the people who are earning between 20 and 30,000, and between 30 and 50,000 or whatever. And so basically, you look at all these people who are earning more than $12,000 a month already, who are choosing to do this because they want to earn extra money. It makes zero sense to look at this and go, oh well, if people had $12,000 a year, they would not do that anymore. And yet, people are earning $30,000 a year, and they're choosing to do that because they want to earn extra. Okay, so study number 4, and this is the best one. So this is just really interesting to me because also, again, this went under my radar. So this was a big review of a bunch of studies, and I didn't know that this study was one of those that was even found to be part of this. But so this was looking at it's called the Peacemaker program, and I'm aware of that. I knew about that, and then I was interested in how it had been spreading, but I had yet to see any data. The Peacemaker program was first done in California, and that's what this study is from, where people received $1,000 a month as part of this program who were at high risk of gun violence. And so this was a program where it's kind of more like the pilots that focus on those who have recently left incarceration, but instead this is those who have had I think previous gun-related convictions, or are like in a gang or something where you expect them to potentially be high risk for gun violence. And so they found them and said, here's $1,000 a month, and you can keep getting this as long as you don't shoot somebody. And then if you are engaged in gun violence, then you lose this. But then that was a successful program, and then that spread to some other places. But I hadn't seen like the actual data. So the study showed the $1,000 a month was associated with reductions in firearm violence. They estimated there were 55% fewer firearm deaths and hospital visits for firearm injury as well as 43% fewer firearm crimes annually due to the program. So that again, that ties in that looks like the previous study where we saw, was one standard deviation increase in cash spending reduced by 14%. And then I thought, yeah, this would be somewhere around 30, 40, 50%. And that's just looks like that, where this $1,000 a month basically cut firearm deaths and crimes in half. And yeah, very, very fascinating to see that of course, that amount and, that program.
It's kind of funny to me. I feel like the more I hear stuff like this, the more I kind of get radicalized as I get older, and like the political machines just kind of crush all my hope, cycle after cycle. But like the whole idea that it's more politically effective to not get things done. If you get things done, then you're kind of run out of shit to do. That's your cause. And if you don't get things done, you can raise a ton of money off like, look, the other guys stopped us from getting this done. You have to vote us in again. So just like, not supporting smarter solutions is potentially an exercise in protecting your own job. Like how if there's this idea that gun violence would be much more radically reduced by implementing a UBI along with a bunch of other things, then all of the people who make their careers like advocating for different sorts of gun control, how much of what's going on in the back of their heads is like, well, that's my issue. And I know, because I've been working in this for 15 years, it's impossible to budge anything even slightly. And I've made a career out of not budging anything even slightly. So you're basically putting them out of a job with all these things. It's also kind of like everyone wants to fight about abortion. And what I want to say to people on the right, regardless of what you think, if you want to reduce abortions, the best thing you can do is give people money. Abortions go down dramatically, whereas criminalizing and penalizing abortions feels like biblically righteous, but it doesn't work. It doesn't reduce them like giving people money does. And what happens when you do something that does have this effect of sort of ameliorating everything to a great degree? Yeah, you get a lot of people that make their lives off of the fact that shit doesn't get fixed, that are now like, what do I do with my life? Like their whole career is based on status quo.
Yeah, interesting too that that you associate or let's say package this or compare it to have like both the gun solution and abortion solution being basic income, where the current argument for both of these is one side or the other, where when it comes to gun violence, it's okay, the solution is gun control. And then the other side says, no, it isn't. You're not touching my guns. And, instead we have to fix mental health, if that's the issue. It's not the guns. And there's no real, solution there from the right in regards to this. It's just saying, oh, let's, it's not guns and we'll figure something else out. And the same thing with abortion. It's it's either prevent all of them entirely, or on the left make sure that it's available. But instead, where is the policy for like actually reducing abortions? And yeah, when it comes to basic income, this is the response to both of these. Like you can actually reduce abortions through basic income, and you can actually reduce gun violence through basic income. And it is a entirely market-friendly response that conservatives should support on both of those, because this is something that they can push for and reduce gun violence without this thing that they fear as far as gun control goes, and without pushing for these extremely unpopular policies that ban abortions, where they're losing so much support. Like, if they wanted to actually push a more popular policy, this should be it. And I hope that at some point, conservatives do start seeing it that way.
It's not that different to me than like the medical industry. That there's no money, or the journalism industry. There's no money in fixing things or reporting good news or in curing things or preventative care. It's all about maintaining a high level of income stream. Maintaining a high level of sickness and maintaining a high level of outrage in the media and maintaining a high level of dysfunction in government. That's the bread and butter for these industries that should be public services. Essentially, they're things that we need to function. They shouldn't be competitive, but being tied into a sort of a profit model means they need to find ways to be extractive and competitive, and that always means reducing the amount that they fix things and making money off of how much they can exacerbate or maintain the problem. It's just like a complete backwards incentivization system for how we should be treating these things that are vital to our survival as a society.
Yeah, I'm curious. Did you actually just watch Andrew Yang's TED Talk that
I did.
gets into
I
that?
did.
Yeah,
It just came out. Yeah, it was a good TED Talk.
it was.
Yeah,
It was on the
he
shorter
did a good
side
job.
too. Like, really was like 10 minutes instead of pushing 20.
Yeah, if the listeners want to hear a good little presentation of essentially ranked choice voting and democracy reform as the old pragmatic Andrew we all remember from like 2020, it's a real good listen, and comes across supremely sensible. So we'll see how they can how people can have an absurd reaction to it. I'm eager to find out.
Yeah, and actually, since we're talking about TED Talk, then this actually ties into another thing I wanted to talk about. Although just before we do this other TED Talk discussion, I also just want to mention, as part of the discussion about gun violence, to tie it off with a bow, is we've seen, like, there's multiple analyses of cost estimates of gun violence in America, and the ones I've seen, it's close to $1 trillion. It's seen like around, I think it's 750 billion as of a few years ago. I think there was another one that's close to $1 trillion. But let's just say like around $800 billion as a result of gun violence every year. And the kind of the breakdown of it, is you've got this calculates like when someone is wounded, then of course that has implications on, like, the work that they do. They can become disabled, and then their lifelong productivity output or whatever is hurt and calculated. And healthcare, the cost of treating these wounds and treating injuries, and you've got the cost of the police and all that, and then lost incomes and incarceration, and all of this money, the totality of that is around $1 trillion per year. So if this is, if what we've seen, what we've just been talking about, is actually that $1,000 a month basically cuts this in half, then you're looking at around $400 billion worth of savings from that. And
Just from gun violence.
Just from gun violence, yeah. Pretty crazy.
So that basically pays for it all by itself. Then you add in like a reduction of medical emergencies, better health in general, less other types of crime, less of the costs of poverty, and the prison industrial complex, and then everybody who actually becomes more productive in society because they're not kind of stuck spinning their wheels in the welfare system as we know it. It's just, I feel like this is another one of the things that I'm always having to tone down in my arguments for UBI because it comes across as naive and utopian to people. But and so one of the things I did with the UBI calculator was to completely disregard all and with my napkin math at the beginning was to assume there are going to be no spillover windfall benefits. Is it worth it? And if we can make the case that it's worth it, even if we don't like save a bunch of money somewhere, like then it should be a no-brainer. Even that, I struggle to figure out a way to present the idea, whether it's through a lot of savings or being worth it without the savings anyway. Like we can pay for it 5 times over, even if we don't save any money and still have plenty of inequality. Nothing really seems to stick. It's sort of like a religious upbringing in America we have about the way things are supposed to work. That it's kind of, I mean, it's the reason, and you know this, Scott, I'm saying this for everybody else, but like I believe that what we're doing with experiential type stuff, with like actually witnessing people living with a basic income and actually being someone living with a basic income feels like the only way we're going to actually break through that just sort of unwillingness to envision something different.
Yeah, it really is this kind of religious kind of on faith, belief in meritocracy. This, I don't know. I think it's easier for us because we just have this engineering background. We think as engineers do, like, okay, here's a problem. Here's different ways of fixing it. Oh, this one works best. Let's do that. Like it's very straightforward and reality based. And I think just so many people aren't reality based. They're, what feels right, what what makes me feel good, what makes me feel icky, based on whatever I was raised.
It's value based, right? Yeah. It's like, so like sort of a Puritan work ethic is one set of value, like religious based values, as is essentially like the bootstraps mythology, the meritocracy. Like these are things that are sort of beaten into us as a form of common sense. Like this is something we all take for granted. It's sort of our messaging, our MO. And so to fly into the face of that, like this is the sort of thing that you, like when you're a kid, you hear, and when you're a kid, you accept whatever it is and you try to explain it, right? Everything must make sense because big people know better than you and they're grown-ups, and so you invent all these stories for why things make sense, like the kind of stuff that I invented, like for how the world worked, like most kids, was pretty insane sometimes. But you just kind of go with it because we're like as we're learning, we're programmed to take what we're fed as truth from authority figures and make it fit like what we see. So we invent all these different sort of rationalizations and stuff that you really commit to as a kid, that sinks in. That's why it's so hard to get out of a religion, or when you're in it really deep, or it's so hard to get out of like any sort of motive thinking, whether it's a religion or it's economics 101 as taught in universities. It's a real problem, and it's like the thing that really breaks people loose is being put into a different environment. I think a lot of, like when someone goes clear of Scientology or something, it's not because they were just sitting there one day and they realized, oh wow, this is kind of absurd. They had to be put into a situation with people who weren't raised that way, who were living differently, and before they can even realize, oh, there's another option.
Yeah.
There's another way things can be. It's kind of like we're not geared to really be that visionary of a species. I don't think we kind of need to see things in action.
This it makes me think of I've been thinking about this recently, just because I know I've told you that I've been just making a point of reading more books, and I did a lot of reading of books as a kid and through my 20s, and and everything. And then I kind of just I continue to have reading, but I just as I wrote more and as I've been advocating for basic income, it's just I kind of just would read basic income related books, and so like my sphere of thinking, really just focused on one thing. And now I've been trying to expand that again, and reading more fiction and stuff, and it makes me like the feeling I've been getting from this is that just a reminder of like when you read stuff, it really is experiential. It can be a made up experience. You're imagining yourself, in someone else's shoes and various characters' shoes, especially in fiction, where there's like a narrator and kind of like you feel like you go into these shoes and then these shoes and these shoes, and you just kind of like I don't know gain like a better understanding and empathy about all the different ways that people can be, because you're kind of like becoming a whole multitude of different characters. And I think that, like as you said earlier, we think that experience is kind of key. And so experience can be you personally experience something, or experience can be you see close friends or family experience something, or you can read books or watch movies or stories and kind of live vicariously these various experiences. And I think that's really important. And I think again part of the issue that we're facing today, in is this kind of like loss of this kind of stepping in other people's shoes, where maybe instead of what you would usually be doing, be reading a book or watching a story with kind of like some kind of morality play or something. Instead, it's just uh, consuming some kind of I don't know, reality television or something that really depending on what it is, it can be actually stepping in someone's shoes, but also it could just be kind of really not helping you think at all. But yeah, I just think it's kind of key is this encouragement of um, of experiencing what it is to live in someone else's shoes.
Yeah, that's a weird question when you think about like when you're looking at somebody's Facebook page or Instagram, like you are getting a glimpse into their life, and I think that there is this massive expansion of empathy for others that's happened through through the growth of social media. You can tune into somebody's YouTube and you kind of get a little slice of their life, and I think that expansion has actually caused like a lot of like weird things to happen, especially for the newer generations. Like it really like it's almost too much. Like our brains can't really see that many different universes at once. Like there's something that feels a little bit oppressive about that much. Like the fact that your world is just this tiny subset of everything of everybody else's world. So I think like we grew up like your main source of empathizing with people is through like fiction and through characters and a few documentaries maybe, right? Like you kind of learn how other people's worlds might be in that way. But now it's like we're almost like seeing too much. Like it's too much for me, at least. Like I can't really like it makes it hard to focus on what's happening in your own world when you're like seeing these glimpses into everybody else's in a pretty clear way. I don't know. But
Yeah,
It's like you're getting these glimpses that are curated oddly as sort of like advertisements.
mm-hmm.
It's
yeah,
not the same as like
Yeah.
sitting down at a table and talking to someone.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that kind of experiential, or like growing up with someone who's friend or family.
Yeah.
It's very, very different. Like, so not only does that sort of create a layer of inauthenticity, that was a hard word to say,
Mm-hmm.
inauthenticity, but then also then
yeah,
when we get like back to this there's no money in like people just getting along in social media either. And so there is money in siloing people and creating clickbait and outraging people and putting all of our best minds into figuring out how we can make it, you know,
Like
non
Yeah, well, like we have to
non-empathetic.
draw these little borders between people because it's just too much otherwise. Like you have to like keep things categorized in some way. You have to like be able to say, okay, that's that group of people over there that's talking about whatever, right? You have to like you're going through this process of like filtering what it is that you want to take in, what information you actually want to be part of your life, and like I think
Yeah,
if you don't have those lines, you're kind of like it's just a lot. It's a I think you
I
just kind
think
of
that
needed to get by that sort of like
like the
categorization of people.
like the word filter, I think is kind of key, where it's always been important to, you know, like it's like the garbage in, garbage out kind of idea. If all you consume are, just horrible books and movies and stuff, then you're not feeding your brain something good. You're going to come up with some bad shit. But if you're feeding yourself something better, this is also why I like, you know I value stuff like Star Trek. Is, how do we get to this better future? Let's even assume that the better future is where we're going, and then figure out how to get there, because we just assume that is the future, and let's do that one. And then so we're surrounded by this just fire hose of stuff through our feeds that may not necessarily at all be uh, good for us, and is even weaponized to be harmful. Like, this is foreign actors like China and Russia kind of pushing these disinformation schemes, trying to do what they can to help divide us, stuff that hurts our mental health. And this is what we have to figure out, or discern better, what is it that we should be putting into our brains, and what is it that we shouldn't. That filter, I think, needs to be kind of more of a part of the educational process, like, not to tell us, what to feed ourselves, but to figure out, you know, what is true and what isn't, um, and learn from that to better differentiate.
It's a funny way to look at it too that you're bringing up, Josh, where it's like I hadn't thought of it that way. Like the limited capacity of like our brains to like take in a certain number of people, right? Is is like something that maybe we need smaller groups. Like, I don't know what the numbers are. It's like 150 people or something in a community is
Mm-hmm.
essentially the most people you can know well.
Yeah.
Um, but there's not a very monetizable model off of connecting people with 150 other people. The money comes from getting, 40 million clicks on an article. And so you have to sort of artificially expand people's networks and shove all this stuff into our faces in such a way that it is monetizable.
Yeah.
Um,
Like the divisions between people are, I mean, we kind of do need them. Like we like to, you need two teams to play a baseball game, right? Like it's not a bad thing necessarily to segment people into different categories. It's just the categories that we use are pretty stupid. Like they're in the social media world, yeah, they're based on like what causes the most strife. Like those are the teams that we file into because it's like those are the ones that are being encouraged because the strife gets clicks, right? The arguing, the more violent the arguing, the better defined the the subgroups become. But like I think that's why I think that's a big problem of like why basic income is kind of a like just the concept of universal at all. Like that's a
Mm-hmm.
hard thing to fit into your head. Like that's you mean everybody? You mean like even the people I don't like should be on the same terms? Like we should all be operating. We kind of all deserve a certain amount of lifestyle. Like what about the person that I hate? What about the person that is a jackass? Like it's just a hard thing to kind of it, to fit in. But it's like when you start to look at things through that economic lens, then it does kind of create this a little bit more benevolent feeling about people, where you're like, yeah, that person's a jackass, but I still think they deserve to live, right? Like I still think they should not be like be under this ridiculous economic pressure that we're all under. And like, maybe if they weren't under it, they wouldn't be such a jackass, right? Like he does, like, I think that's kind of the beauty of even thinking about universal basic income, is just that you're confronted with this concept of universality, and like, what is that, right? Anyway.
I mean, it's kind of, I do get a little wary of framing it as like teams playing against each other. I think there's a way to segment ourselves, and I think it's actually kind of necessary to segment ourselves as a society, of course, to break it down, but with like a shared common objective, like a shared national story, a shared global story, like to take it out of this strictly competitive space. Like we can all sort of compete in the markets and compete for innovation and stuff like that, but never compete like as if it's a zero sum thing. I think that's where we shoot ourselves in the foot. And it's like if you're on the same soccer team, you're competing for the first spot on the team, right? Or everyone's trying to, bring the most they can to it, but you're not trying to like win against your teammates necessarily.
Right. I mean, that's what I think. Like, I'm not a big sports person, but I think sports are amazing. Like, they're an incredibly valuable thing that we have in the world. Like, just because they're a way for us to take this natural tendency to divide into teams and fight against each other. Like, we're not getting rid of that tendency. Like, that is hardwired from the dawn of time, right? But now we've figured out a way to funnel that into something that's pretty fun. Like, it's a good way to pass the time. Like, and so, yeah, the team analogy does like invite this like idea of competition, like that we need to divide up into two teams fighting against each other. But like the sports analogy, like we're all playing the same sport, is kind of a way to step back and see like we're playing a game here, right? And it's just in terms of like how we conceive of one another. I think it's a nice thing we do, sports. I don't know how we got out of it, but
I think a good example of just how much better sports is, than like war is. I remember, watching Rocky IV. Like I much preferred Rocky IV ending the Cold War, in that way.
Right, yeah.
Like it was, I'd much prefer a boxing match than a hot war. That's,
right, yeah, and just the Olympics.
Thanks, Rocky.
Like it's a valuable thing to like just have every country get together and just play a sport against each other. Like that's cool. Like maybe it's not solving anything. It's not creating policies, or it's not. There's no like real. There's nothing comes out of it, but the act of doing it is sort of exercising these kind of demons that we have of like we need to fight each other, but let's do it in a way that isn't going to cause any real problems, right?
But there's also another mode of sport too that doesn't have to be competitive against people at all. It's like with board games. I grew up in I had like some very traumatic experiences in my childhood due to board games. Just because of like we played a lot of Monopoly. There was this game called Solar Quest, and someone would end up in tears, storm out, and it's meant to be super competitive. That's a whole other story.
Did you say Solar Quest? I think I have a copy.
Solar Quest.
Yeah,
you have that? It's really hard to find.
Mm-hmm.
But it just became this battle to the death between me and my friend and our older brothers, and it was awful. It was just awful. And then when I got older, I started noticing some of these games coming out. Like I went through a board game phase with some of my roommates when I was like in my 20s in New York, and they were collaborative games. There's this game called Pandemic, which isn't as fun to think about playing anymore. But the whole point was everyone works together to beat the outbreak, like this common shared goal, or like all of those big disaster movies like Independence Day or whatever, where we have like a bigger thing than our conflicts. So we set those down and all fight together against something loftier, right? It's not a zero sum game. It's like we're all working towards something better for everybody. And there's a lot we can do in that mode that I don't think we need to necessarily always divide up into competitive factions. I think there are ways and plenty of circumstances where we can work together. I actually think the competition side of things is great, where you want like a lot of innovation, like the capitalistic free market side of things. I'm for that. But on the other hand, there's a lot of things that are basic human rights that we should handle as if it's just like a collaborative goal, like a collaborative board game exercise where there is no loser except all of us if we don't solve that issue.
Yeah, it makes me think too of just like the preamble to the Constitution, as far as, talk about a collaborative kind of setup,
Mm-hmm.
we
Yeah.
the people, and what are we doing? Well, we're going to be doing this, 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 and this, and we're only going to be doing it, together. And it's like we're agreeing to the rules that we're all. It's going to be for all of us, and it's going to improve all of our lives. Yeah, it's government itself, highly collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
But
so
it is an interesting thing that the government itself is now divided into two teams, basically. Like
right, as
that is,
Washington warned against.
yeah. That sort of division into kind of like
Yeah,
inevitable
like
just
that
by.
was the nightmare version. Yeah, of that
Mm-hmm.
Washington saw, was division into two parties.
Yeah, I don't know if it was inevitable. I'd like to think it wasn't, but it's definitely something we're dealing with. And that goes back to Yang's TED Talk. That's kind of what he's talking about. Is how do we get out of that just sort of endless situation of it behooves people to not get anything done and to just fight. Like fighting is the whole purpose of the industry. In this case, the political industry.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it was inevitable based on just the winner take all plurality system, and
Mm-hmm.
that is also what like Yang's argument is, and that I hope more people, get to understand, instead of one side or the other, looking at, okay, well, what's the natural outcome, of the rules that we've set up, and because of the rules being winner take all, it makes all the sense in the world to have only two parties. Because as soon as you
Yeah.
have a third
Mm-hmm.
one, then you spoil it. So,
Right.
But
Like
change that.
systemically inevitable rather
Right.
than like people want to focus on inevitability because humans are just some sort of way,
Right.
which never sits well with me, never makes a lot of sense, or at least it isn't useful because it just means it's intractable. There's nothing we can do about it. And so, there's nothing to grab onto there. Like, just give up and fight each other. But I don't know why we're so resistant to the idea of systems change if it has like a real potential to change the outcomes of things. Like we're so, I don't know, so
but
committed to
it
this
also has
idea
the
of
potential
fighting.
to make things different and possibly worse, right? Like so that
Right.
it's
Maybe,
just
yeah,
like sort
fear
of
of
a
the unknown.
tendency for like being risk averse, right? Like you don't. It's better to have this kind of crappy thing that than something
So,
that could be
there's always
worse.
the question of when does the tipping point come when enough people are suffering bad enough that there's like a revolution.
Yeah,
And it's always a lot later than
than it should be. Yeah.
people think.
Mm-hmm.
Except maybe in France, because they've been through this shit before. They're like, you did a carbon tax, riots. It's like
Mm-hmm.
they're sort of a little readier, it seems like, to kind of stand up for themselves. Whereas we're like, I'm still making it. I'm just gonna play this out a little bit longer. Like people, and as more and more people drop out of the middle class,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, well, I just got to fight harder to not be one of them, and it's just you can kind of go on that way for a very long time.
But yeah, I always found it like when there was the Bush Gore like tie where
Mm.
we weren't even sure. Like I was just amazed that like we could get that close. Like it could get down to if you're like just having people randomly, supposedly by their own volition, choosing what in their heart they think is the better person, that it happens to land exactly on 50%. Like there's something strange about that, like that it does feel like we are sort of gravitating to this like numerical divide, right? Like that we just sort of, there's something that is something in the system, yeah, that is creating this like 50% division, right? And it's
if there's any indicator that the whole system is made for us to fight, I mean that's it.
Yeah.
That happens over and over and over again, regardless of how dog shit the candidate for one side or the other is. Then it's like, so we're not really playing a fair game. It's about us fighting. That's what it's about.
So which it kind of is, yeah, in an election. Yeah.
I want to get to back to the TED Talk that I wanted to talk about next, and this totally ties into everything we've been talking about. And of course, it's just interesting too that it happens to be another TED Talk, and it's the other TED Talk that I've seen recently besides Yang's. That Yang of course just mentioned basic income in his TED Talk, arguing that look, until we actually reform the system, we're not going to actually win the policies like basic income that we need. And this other TED Talk was from Scott Galloway. His is How the U.S. is Destroying Young People's Future. And I was surprised that he mentioned basic income in his TED Talk too. And so his TED Talk is about also kind of what we've been talking about earlier with like, the impact of social media. He says that that basically like Zuckerberg has done like the most harm for young people than like any other single person has. That we're totally letting down our younger generations, our kids, handing them a system that's even worse for them and better for previous generations. And it's a good TED Talk. I recommend checking it out. But what I was surprised by was the basic income mention, and so I'm just gonna play this segment, and this will lead into our next discussion. So I'll just, let's see, put my mic up against this and see if this works.
We need a negative income tax. My friend Andrew Yang screwed up a great idea, but he branded it incorrectly. Instead of calling it UBI, he should got Republicans on board by calling it a negative income tax. We need to eliminate the...
So yeah, so that was just a quick mention where he argues that we should have a negative income tax, and that even it was a mistake on Andrew's part to call it universal basic income, even though he actually called it freedom dividend, and it just is a basic income. But he also argues in his TED Talk that that we're doing Social Security wrong, and that Social Security should not be effectively universal by age, and that it should be effectively targeted by income. And so I can see that what his belief is that universalism is bad, and that we should actually be income testing basically everything. And so he argues for a bunch of other stuff like college and pre-K and these things, and even he says that like affirmative action, the problem with it is that it's focused on the wrong color, that it should be focused on green, in which case money. And so like basically income test everything, and if you're low income, then you should receive more than anyone else. And so that's why he likes the negative income tax, and he also wants this basically like a negative income tax structure for Social Security. And
so he doesn't understand the difference between a negative income tax is another way to put it. Is he doesn't really get the mechanism.
I don't think he gets the mechanism. No. Like if we want to when it comes to messaging, we've talked about this before, where a lot of people who aren't really like deep into the basic income discussion, they'll kind of just like dip their toes in, they look into it, and then they say, oh, I see what the problem is. You're calling it the wrong thing. It needs to be this. And if you only named it this and called it this, then it would already be a policy. So already that kind of bothers me when they make that argument. I think it can be useful, to help describe basic income as a negative income tax, because it's the opposite of a tax. And so that's like, there's something useful there. But as far as like the structure of negative income tax goes, which for those who may not know what it is, negative income tax is what Milton Friedman recommended. And this uses a phase out rate. So usually Milton Friedman would talk about a 50% phase out rate, where each additional dollar meant that you lost 50 cents of your negative income tax, grant. And some people much prefer that because they think, oh, well, it should not go to Bill Gates and those with higher incomes. Of course, it should only go to the poor, and it should be disproportionate. And that's just the way it is. But of course, once you really get into it, and this is something even Milton Friedman understood, that you can achieve the same outcome by just applying a tax in order to effectively do the subtraction via the tax pathway instead of the grant pathway. And that is arguably, the better way to go, because if you make sure that everybody has something, then you make sure nobody misses it. And then you just make sure that you subtract it for those who don't need it. And that's just a better way of doing this.
It just misses all the bureaucracy. It misses all the things that the people who are fighting for a negative income tax thinks they're protecting against it. Yeah, and he kind of delivers it with like the typical like ultimate confidence that
exactly
that I'm used to hearing. And like from the sort of person that would tell me, their 4-year-old has better understanding of economics 101 than me, like the typical shit you hear online.
Yeah.
Of people that actually have never looked into it. They're just kind of going on a gut instinct. Like, and that's part of that religious upbringing of like, well, we need to make sure money only goes towards the poor. And so then we need to determine who's poor enough. And it's sort of an unthinking reaction. I don't envy. I mean, I at least I feel for or sympathize with Yang for having to sit through that, and for the 400,000th time.
Yeah. Scott Galloway just comes off exactly like you described. Like it's worth watching, and he shares valuable statistics and stuff, and he points out the problem well and stuff. But it really is like a good example of like you can tell when someone has like just enough knowledge of basic income to support it, but then not enough to like fully deeply understand like why it is structured and the way it is compared to other systems. Instead, you just think, oh, well, of course people should get money. I support that. We should do that, without really deeply understanding it.
They see the perks as a flaw, and they see the flaws of what they promote as perks. Like, and I think a lot of it comes to what plagues economists in general and policymakers in general is no real world experience with the stuff that they're making policies about. Like I say all the time that economists should have to, one, take human behavioral psychology, because they make all these assumptions about human behavior that are like humans are, asset accumulating machines, and they will do everything as possible to do as little work in their life and accumulate as many things as possible. And it's just like a really rank misunderstanding of what drives human beings, like treating us like we are Roombas going around sweeping up dirt or money like dirt, and we're programmed for that and that only. Like we don't have higher callings or purposes or like things that we love or anything. And the other thing economists always get wrong is, or what the experience that they need is time in as social workers. They should be forced to work for like 5 years or 2 years as a social worker so they can understand what it actually means for somebody going through the systems they propose, like what those bureaucratic steps actually mean. Because what they actually mean is enormous work disincentives, enormous stigma, and at least half of the people you're supposedly smartly targeting the money towards not getting it at all. Um,
Yeah.
it's just this very vaunted and like understood to be scientific profession where they half of the knowledge that they're going forward on is based on just blind assumptions that are unfounded.
Yep. We have our first request to speak, and that reminds me too. So we're after the 1 hour mark, and so this is where we do welcome people to request to speak. Ask questions, contribute to the discussion as we've been talking about, or whatever you want to talk about. It's totally open, as long as it's related about basic income. So I'm going to invite our guest to speak before moving on to the next news piece. Or maybe that's not going to work. I just approved them and they disappeared.
Our speaker
Okay.
is named I'm a Spoon, so it may be that the person is a spoon and not a person. So.
Spoon, thanks for joining us. You there, Spoon?
There's somebody.
Maybe you're on mute.
Hello? Sorry, I was putting my
Okay.
my headphones in.
Yeah, we hear you now.
Oh, I hear you.
I have not been like in the conversation of basic income for a hot minute since Yang's campaign and campaigning for him and everything. So when I joined in, I heard you talking about a few TED Talk speakers who had mentioned basic income recently. Are there any current people like running for Congress or in Congress who are open to the idea of a basic income or have openly talked about it recently? Do you all know?
That's a good one. Yeah, just give him a shout out, Scott.
Yeah, so mostly the people who have been talking about basic income are those who are not incumbents, that are brand new candidates looking to win. And there's a couple of those, but I would uplift the fact that when we're looking at those in Congress, I think one of the more interesting newer ones is what's the guy's name in California looking to be the new senator?
David Kim, I believe. Was it him?
No, he's running for the House. I mean the Senate seat.
I don't know about Senate. There's a guy named Josh Bocanegra somewhere in California. I feel like I've heard of someone else too.
Yeah. I'm California based. I've not heard about it.
Okay, so in California,
who's
the one who won the Senate primary? This is looking to replace the seat that was opened up.
Who won recently for the latest one?
Yeah, who won the primary? Or they have a top two primary. So there's Steve Garvey as a Republican who's moving up to the general, and then the other one. I don't know why I'm not remembering his name. Oh, Adam Schiff. Okay, so Adam Schiff included in his platform that he would like to pass the bill that has proposed a national basic income pilot. I believe that bill was proposed by a couple of members of the squad, I believe, at least, are the co-sponsors. Which is not too surprising for Omar, because she's also proposed another guaranteed basic income bill, and then there's the one who has the End Child Poverty Act. What's her name? Sorry, I'm not remembering names off the top of my head. But
there's Tlaib. There's Rashida Tlaib had one.
Yeah, Rashida. Yeah.
And AOC, a lot of people don't actually know is a potential ally. There's a lot of people who are potential allies, I feel like, especially in the squad type groups. I happened to meet AOC early on when she was running for the first time. I lived in New York City, and I randomly got an invite to go, phone banking or whatever, which was a miserable experience. I didn't get like one person that responded to the call or was the right person that was supposed to live there. So I just made like 20 calls in 2 hours and accomplished nothing. But we hung out with her afterward, and this is when no one knew who she was, and I was already into UBI, so I was asking her about it, and she was really smart about it. My take on her and a lot of people is that you know, politicians don't lead; they kind of follow. So, like something that's already established and safe, the more we make that the case, the more they'll support it. She does have a history of like misinterpreting Yang's campaign, for example. I don't know if that was like
Right, part of the primary
competition,
process, yeah.
trying to like not show any support for anyone but Bernie or something like that. I kind of try not to speculate too hard on any of that stuff because I don't really know what they're dealing with or the decisions they're making at that time. But I do know that she's someone also who's supportive of UBI.
Yeah, and I just wanted to stress what's interesting to me about Adam Schiff is that, he's not the squad. So I feel that as long as the squad supports something, then I mean that's very divisive. People can look at that and go, "Oh, well, of course they do because it's extreme." So what we want is like those candidates who are considered to be like more middle of the road, more, not extreme to support the policy. And I think that's a step forward for someone like Adam Schiff to feel that he is safe enough in adding it to his platform that he can actually, win. And it's a California, so maybe he's making that calculation too. Is California just being, left leaning enough that he can do that? But
And
it's a good sign.
it seems like every election cycle, there's a few more people kind of running on it, and they still haven't cracked very high into the races, but more and more they're sort of getting taken seriously, getting past the primaries, getting into the general, that sort of thing. In these local races or these state races. And then there's Spoon. If you don't know about the sort of some of the referendum stuff, there's an interesting referendum going on in Oregon called the Oregon People's Rebate, or maybe they're just calling it the Oregon Rebate now.
Yeah.
But they're sort of repeating the precedent of the Alaska Permanent Fund, but doing it with corporate taxes, and they're trying to get that on the referendum for this next cycle, where every Oregonian man, woman, and child would get on the order of $750 a year, which is a small and only once annually basic income, but it still sort of counts and would set a pretty big precedent. So there's a bunch of angles going. I still would like to see like Citizens Climate Lobby and carbon tax and dividend like make some traction, because historically that's had much more bipartisan support or nonpartisan support or whatever.
But yeah, I mean, it seems like people that are more on the local level could end up having more of an impact, and like people running like on the national level for the federal government seems like nobody was really running on a legalized marijuana platform at the national level, right? But you still saw it happening everywhere. Like they were sort of saying, giving a thumbs up to like, yeah, I'm not against that, but it wasn't like a national type of thing to run on. And
That's a good point to raise too. How like I believe the mayors for guaranteed income just surpassed 150 mayors like last week. So they're basically creating a pipeline. So you've got a mayor who runs on this, who has a pilot in their city, and the pilot does well, and they're able to promote these positive results, and then they move up to the state level or something, and then they promote some program there. And we're actually already seeing this too with these like earlier cohorts of mayors like already like moving up. So I do expect that some of those mayors are going to end up in Congress at some point. And they'll of course be they'll actually not only support it because it's a good idea, but they'll be like, yeah, I witnessed it. Like I did this and I saw what the difference it made, and it's a good idea.
Yeah, for all the things I complain about in the movement right now, there is something that's pretty encouraging, is how much more diversified all the different approaches are. So there's like the small policy approach, people pushing for the carbon tax type stuff. There's the state level, there's the local level, there's all the pilots going on. And then with us, if you're new to like what we're doing with Comingle, it's the private sector approach. We're looking to essentially create the first permanent, scalable basic income, and sort of do an end run around the politics to get something big and large impact based on a self-selecting little nation of volunteers, essentially. Like, how many people can we get on a social media platform? What if instead of social media, it's about redistributing money and like along a basic income model and the data that can come out of that? So the movement itself has broadened much more from where it essentially came into national awareness with Andrew Yang and like this very high focus, essentially celebrity campaign. Is this one-time thing where you start by getting a lot of attention with a national run for presidency that did a lot better than anyone expected. I don't know when to expect that to happen again, but everything is pushing more and growing more and more in the direction and from a lot of different angles, so that we're not just hoping, some long shot wins. We have 8 irons in the fire as a movement, so to speak.
Yeah, it wasn't even so much that somebody was running. It was more that Andrew Yang was on Joe Rogan. That like getting the Joe Rogan endorsement was actually kind of a bigger deal. Like that the airwaves that at large were willing to entertain the concept was kind of what was most important, I think, about his campaign.
I was on Yang's campaign like pre-Rogan, and yeah, Rogan is the thing that jump started him. If he didn't have Rogan, he would not have gotten as far as he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, people underestimate celebrity. That's a big part of what we're trying to do too, is to start getting like major celebrities on board. We had a fun one the other day that I'm not at liberty to discuss, but we had we had Scott and I happened to meet a high level celebrity who I wish I'd been recording, but
Yeah.
we'll try again. Who said, I support guaranteed basic income, and we're starting to push with the docu-series with Comingle to have ways for people who are powerful influence. I don't like the fact that several people can move the hearts and minds of millions, but that is the water we're swimming in, and so we better get that. That's got to be part of our arsenal. In this.
What's your guys' opinions on where the benchmark for like the basic income should be now at this point? Because like during Yang's campaign, what he advocated for was like $1,000 a month. A nice clean 1,000 was easily marketable. But I know a lot of people who advocate for UBI have deviated from just 1K a month to maybe higher or maybe a little lower. What is your guys' opinions?
I mean, at Comingle, it's like it's as much as possible. There's no actual set number. But if the number is as much as possible, then and sometimes it'll be small, sometimes it'll be big. But like policy wise, yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, policy wise,
what is Yeah, Comingle is more of like an optimizing approach to see what we can get it to. But yeah, policy wise, I think, and Scott is sort of on the same page about this. Far more important than the number is the universality of it, and a lot of people miss the universality in focusing on the number.
No,
I'm gonna answer about the number, but I think like a $100 a month universal program is a better place to start than $1,000 a month targeted specific people in a specific way that keeps it from growing to what it can be. Because I think once we get something universal in place, it will prove itself and just give us an excuse to start putting more money in there. But in terms of, I think a great place to start is 1,000 a month would still be very impactful, and it's a nice round number, so that's still worth considering. But I also like part of the reason people did 1,000 a month wasn't just because it was a round number. It was essentially the level of the federal poverty line that year. Mm-hmm. So it's like 1,200 a month now, something like that. If we take that symbolic step of saying, the point of this policy is we don't let anyone fall below the poverty line. You start at the poverty line so that no one's in extreme poverty. And then that sort of invites like, okay, what do we peg it to? Do we have it be a moving target? And also, how do we argue like what the poverty line should be? Because that's sort of an endless argument. So what I would really push for is pick something, add a number, and then say, okay, this is some percentage of Scott likes GDP, I like average income per capita, but peg it to that percentage. So as the economy grows and prosperity rises, there's like a rising tide effect, and we're not having the fight forever like we are with minimum wage and stuff like that.
I think what you said initially with like having $100 and having it universal like is the best starting point, because that's easier to market to, like towards the people and towards like the big wigs in Washington and shit like that. But
it sort of forces you to build the infrastructure too. Like
Yeah.
if we have that in place, then we have to build the federal bank or the postal banking or whatever to just get everyone connected to the system. And as soon as everyone's connected, all it takes is a click of a button or a choice to say, here's another source of revenue we want to plop in there too, right? So the big lift logistically is getting the system set up.
Yeah, and I think too that yeah, you're just going to see a lot less inflationary pressure with a lower starting point. So if we're able to start with something at $100 a month, $200 a month, $3 a month, $400 a month, $5, anywhere that's like kind of lower like that, looking at kind of extreme poverty, then it's highly unlikely to have any kind of inflationary pressure at that amount. And then so you're not going to have as many people like jumping up and down after implementation, blaming basic income for like being so inflationary.
I think it's just important. It'll be important to sell it as an experiment to like see what happens, rather than as like, this is the final proposal for like what we want to do. It's more like, no, we acknowledge everyone's concerns that we don't want to tank the economy. We have a humility enough to say, let's start with a level this much. Maybe it won't be enough yet to phase out like other forms of welfare. It won't have all perks and bells and whistles of UBI, but yeah, like put something in place and start measuring, and then it's a lot easier to sell based on results, I would think and hope.
Yeah, and also you'd see this again, the return on investment too. And so, like we know that if you were to introduce, let's say, $1,000 a month basic income tomorrow, then we're going to see reduced expenses. But those reduced expenses, some are going to be immediate, but some are going to take a few more years. Like you're not going to start seeing returns to the degree of like really healthy reduction of spending on like crime and healthcare and stuff for at least a few years. So if you start low, then that impact will start happening. And then so by the time you start raising it later, you're already seeing the returns from the previous one. So I think that even makes it, let's say, even less inflationary because you're already seeing these savings from the original amount.
God forbid if an experiment like that were to pass, people latch onto it like they did with the Finland basic income experiment, with how reactionary they were with the results of that, even though like the results were in the end like good about it.
Yeah. I mean,
it was
misinformation.
It was also like poorly designed. It wasn't really a basic income.
No, it wasn't.
So
it wasn't. Yeah,
that's one of the dangers too, is that we implement something that people are calling a basic income that isn't, and then basic income has to answer and defend like an inferior program. So there's always going to be a lot of messaging issues and like misinformation things. But the better the thing we put in place, the better it just will work.
Mm-hmm. Like the Alaska PFD and whatnot.
Yeah, Alaska's dividend that's essentially or is a UBI by definition. It'd be nice if more people talked about it that way and talked about the impacts of that. I bring it up all the time in response to people, claiming that basic income is Marxist or communist or whatever. And it's like, well, gee, do
It's just,
Alaskans know that?
yeah, it's just a people policy. It's not ideological to an extent.
Yeah. Thanks, Spoon, for
And welcome back to UBI.
yeah.
Yeah, no. I don't know. It's been after Yang, it's been a lot, and life moves on and whatnot. I'm gonna leave y'all off with one more thing. Have y'all heard of the futurist Michio Kaku or whatever? Um, he's predicted a lot of things like BCIs
Oh,
at
yeah,
certain
sure.
times and whatnot. His prediction of UBI is gonna come about like around 2030. He's pretty sure
Yeah.
on that. I hope it comes around way earlier than that. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
And
Does that what are your thoughts on that?
my thoughts are, I appreciate these predictions of, oh, basic income will happen in the 30s, and yeah, Kaku is not the only one. The other well-known futurist has said the same thing. Can't remember his name at the moment, but there's been multiple predictions of 2030, early 2030s, and what I say to that is, like maybe, but it all depends on us. Like you can make all the predictions you want to, but it's not going to just happen.
No, yeah, of course.
It requires like it's going to require a lot of effort. Like this has to be a grassroots, people demanding this, politicians feeling that if they're not for it, they're not going to win. If they're against it, they're going to lose their jobs. Like that's the way it has to be. It's not going to just be, oh, what a great idea this is. Now that AI has reached this point, let's go ahead and do this. Like it's just
Right.
it causes too many. It's too big of a change to the status quo to the point where this is power to the people. It's a greater democratization of power, power to say no, freedom to say yes. Like the rich who do not want to see higher taxes, they're already putting money into pushing against basic income. It's why you see these state by state bans. It's why Iowa just banned it. They're the first state, governor to sign that ban into law with no more pilots there. And
What
Texas.
lobbies were responsible for that? Like I'd seen those too, and I was very confused and perplexed.
Yeah, it's the Foundation for Government Accountability. I wrote an article about that, and who the main donors are and stuff, and
Hmm.
and it really is. It's billionaire funded, and it ultimately comes down to I don't want to see higher taxes. So these pilots are producing good results, and I don't want to see that. So I'm going to use my dollars to lobby at the state level to prevent this.
Yeah, and that's the thing that worries me a lot is like in certain circles, like there's this sort of fatalist, like it's inevitable that this will happen. It's sort of a cop out of like, yeah, basic income's obviously gonna have to happen from anyone from like my little brother to Elon Musk, kind of like take that attitude where it's like, it's a prediction that something's gonna happen based on what seems obvious, what are trends, but what it really is also a prediction of, especially if it's someone's like a holistic thinker in their predictions. It's a prediction that the human behavior needed to get it there is going to get it there. It's not just like a prediction based on, well, I've done the math on this policy and it seems to work. Like I was there many years ago. It's a prediction of there seems to be enough energy and a growing attention and appreciation for it that people are going to push this over the finish line.
Yeah.
And so, and we are the people who are doing it, like us in this room, the people talking about it. So it should not be taken as a reason to relax at all. It should be taken as encouragement to fight harder, and it's important to see it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's nice to have those predictions out there because then you're like, what? People are like, well, that's never going to amount to anything. You can at least be like, well, these people say it's going to amount to something. Like the people that are actually trying to like make predictions about the future seem to agree that it's a track worth treading. Yeah.
Alternatively, you can talk about like Krugman predicting that it won't happen as a pretty good indicator that it will.
Right.
Like,
wait, who predicted it wouldn't happen?
No,
I'm sure he had at one point. It's an inside joke about Paul Krugman, but like he's been sort of an idiot about a basic income for a long time. Nobel Prize winning idiot.
The guy who said the same thing about
but
like copy printers and the internet or
Yeah.
something.
well, he
Yeah.
said
Fax machine.
the internet will have no more effect on the economy than the fax machine. It's
Ah,
like they should have at that point. I don't know if he got it before or after his Nobel Prize, but he should have been disqualified. It should have been stripped or whatever.
mm.
Yeah,
Well,
and
well,
I'll just add too that when
mm,
it like it's it helps move the origin window when anyone makes a prediction that basic income is going to happen, because then it becomes a realistic policy, and that's great. But I would say, like, when Elon Musk says that basic income is necessary and it's going to happen in the 2030s, then that does help it seem to be more of a realistic policy that we should be discussing and stuff. But if Elon Musk were to put in, say, $1 billion into, say, the Income to Support All Foundation and other groups that are supportive of basic income, it would be more likely,
Yeah,
and so he
a
could
lot of
actually
it would
he could
happen the next day.
he could
a,
make
a,
his own
lo-
prediction come true.
a lot of these tech bigwigs are pro basic income, like amongst the billionaire and like millionaire class. Like, the tech sector seems to want basic income, but like other millionaires and billionaires aren't really excited about it, right? Because they see the
Well,
writing on the wall.
they're
Yeah,
not even excited about it. They're just kind of like they're also sort of like objectively predicting it, but they're not taking a real stand. There's only a few that take somewhat of a stand. Like Chris Hughes had a lot of Facebook money. He's put a little bit of his money toward it, and he's put together like this organization about it. I could talk about that, but I'm not going to.
Mhm.
Um,
I'd say Sam
but
Altman. Yeah, for sure.
Sam Altman is someone who really actually is pushing for it. Like he ran his own pilot with his own money. That was like it's like a $50 million pilot or something like that. And
Is he
it's a big part
responsible
of what he wants to
for
do with OpenAI.
is he responsible for Y Combinator? Or is that am I thinking of someone else?
Yeah,
No, you're
he's
right.
he's
Yeah,
Y Combinator and he's OpenAI. So he wants to make it part of the stuff he's doing with OpenAI these days.
yeah.
Mhm.
So it's very valuable to have the founder, co-founder, and CEO of OpenAI to be really talking about basic income, the need for it. He's even expressed how we're going to look back, decades from now and think it was ridiculous that we used, withholding of food to motivate people. He, spent all this money on his own pilot. The results it's a multi-year, multi-state pilot. Those results will be out, I think, sometime this August or September.
Ooh.
So
Mhm.
when that happens, I expect there to be, again, a lot more discussion as a result of that, just because of
Yeah.
of of who he is and the fact that he's right at the center of the AI discussion with OpenAI.
And
So
if Sam's listening, if he gives us $1 billion, we'll have UBI by mid 2020s.
crazy.
Pretty sure.
I have a family member like on a sitting state congress, and I have a few friends who are like on sitting state congresses, or like they're aiming higher past state congress and whatnot. And I've tried to convince them to adopt UBI onto their platforms or their run run again platforms and whatnot. And they on principle they support UBI. Most of them are very progressive, but like they're worried about like being able to market it, and that's a core reason they haven't put it onto their platform. And I'm like at a loss. Like it's so easily marketable. Like some of these people that I'm referring to are more so in majority red states. So I guess that's the concern. It's going to be like construed as free, quote unquote, free money, like it was during Yang's campaign.
Well,
But
what's so funny about that too is you'll see conservatives claim that that basic income is somehow kind of like some cheat code. Like, oh well, that's not fair. They're running on basic income. That's just that they're basically paying for votes, and of
yeah,
course they'll win if they run on basic income. So it's just funny to see like Republicans say it's if Democrats run, it's too easy to win, and then to see Democrats say we don't know about adding this to our platforms because we don't know how to communicate it.
I think
It's funny
like
too, like the
mhm,
movement has become so like politicized in basic income. Like a bunch of progressives came in during the pandemic and leftists and liberals and tried to make it the typical old political thing when it enjoyed such nonpartisan support. Like Yang pulled over more conservatives and Republicans during the primaries than Bernie. He more than anybody, and it's because he just spoke practical and he spoke power to the individual and that sort of thing. I have no problem talking to conservatives about basic income. You just kind of have to meet them where they're at and not try to make it like a pissing contest. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with the like we have in our documentary, we have a red state prepper getting his basic income, and he's all in, and he's like, he's ready for the basic income revolution, and he thinks he calls me to tell me the Clintons are going to assassinate me for trying to do basic income, and it's like
it's easier. Like what I found, like campaigning, like during the 2020 campaign for Yang and whatnot, and like other campaigns, it's easier for me to convince conservatives, like as opposed to progressives, which is why I don't know how to explain it. I like the left eats their own is like comes to mind, but I don't really like giving credence to that idea. I don't. It just perplexes me. Like how are conservatives like the ones that like the like the way Yang prepared his whole shtick for convincing people of basic income is he prepared it within mind that conservatives would be the hardest ones to convince, not his own camp. And if he had known prior that like progressives would also be like really against him, then I think maybe things would have went differently. I still think he would have been the dark horse and he wouldn't have like maybe won, but it could have been like went farther. Like the idea of basic
It's like
income.
we were talking about before. We're addicted to the fight. Basically, that's the whole story. We're not addicted to, or we're not set up politically to solve problems. We're set up to fight. Like all the fundraising comes from fighting and not getting stuff done. And you come in as a pragmatist, you kind of like are anti that whole thing. You're rocking the boat for everybody.
I will say, like as to your point, one of said people I was talking about, they had the same issue of like people in their own camp like pushing back against it. And I don't know what advice to give them. Like I can't in good conscience like keep pounding them about it when I know like they're fighting up essentially. They're punching up in their own camp when they shouldn't be with adoption of UBI or like just even something more marketable.
I think that post-COVID, we saw this kind of, even during Yang's campaign, yes, there were progressives who were pushing against Yang's platform just because, they wanted to uplift Bernie, and that's all just part of the system. But post-COVID, we've seen that there's just the response from progressives to inflation is we can't give people money because it'll just cause inflation. So, a lot of these people were already interested in, benefits in kind and services instead. So I just think there's been kind of a boost in this, let's provide services instead of income, because we can't trust markets. Businesses are greedy. We just can't do that. Let's just lean full government services instead of cash, which is, it already agrees with kind of the socialist mentality of, let's just do government services. So it's not like it's all that unusual or unexpected, but it does seem to be amplified as a result of inflation to see that.
Okay, so I said a while ago that like what I was like one of the things I was saying was going to be the last thing, but this is genuinely the last thing before I hop off. I want to ask you all how you came to find out about basic income, or like when was the first time you had heard about this, and what were your first thoughts back then? Because I've always been curious.
Yeah, I feel that we only have like 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that Utu is able to speak to.
Oh yeah.
So I'm not going to answer that question. I just feel I answer that question like all the time. Maybe Conrad or Josh can give like a quick answer, but I do want to make sure that Utu is able to speak next.
Yeah,
mine's very quick. I just read an article that was like, wow, we can just do this. I never thought of that. And then I did some math, and then happened to be in a position where my wife was starting on a documentary project. So I had the excuse to explore it as a career, and then just kind of dived in.
Nice.
Yeah, I think I was just listening to a NPR talk about it, and it might have even been Scott that was on it. I don't know. it just kind of opened my eyes, and like it was a very. I was like, yeah, why aren't we doing that? You know.
Well, okay. Thank you for the answer, guys. Thank you for the conversation.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks.
tapping back in. See you in the flip side.
Yeah, come back. We're here every Wednesday.
Will do.
Fun to talk to you.
All right, Utu, thanks for joining us. You there? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
oh, hi. There you go.
Yeah, hi, Scott, Conrad, and Josh.
Hi.
It's always good listening to you. Yeah, and you pronounce the name right. It's Utu. It means humane in Swahili. Now, there's a point I want to bring out about basic income and climate change, because this is something that here in my country we are experiencing firsthand. We currently have the El Nino rains, and they have been paired with this time they're a bit more intense because of the increase in temperatures. There's some winds that are blowing across the Atlantic, and they are meeting up in the equator, causing these sudden heavy rains to come. And this has led to a lot of flooding, and it has brought a lot of devastation, especially in our capital city. Apparently, it was built on a floodplain. So right now, many rivers are flooded, and people are left homeless. Some people have died due to these occurrences. And now it brings a question of how best to bring aid to people who have been affected. The government has come in, but they are not actually helping a lot to the individuals who are affected. In fact, the president just offered a stipend of about $100 to the families who have been left homeless, which is quite a small amount of money. And I was thinking, how can something like a UBI be able to actually assist people who have been affected? Because when you come to have a look, most of the people who actually are left homeless are the ones who were in poverty before, and were living near these riparian lands. That is land that is near the near rivers and have flooded. So an idea like Comingle is, I can actually see it leaping, like getting funds. Like right now, let's say people, they're not waiting for the government to come and help, and they want to go and help such people. How fast can we get funds through there? Yeah, I don't know if I'm.
Yeah,
if I'm
I mean,
coming
have
out
you?
a bit clear.
Yeah, first off, how are you? How are things where you are right now?
Me, I'm okay. I'm currently situated in the Highlands, so I'm not currently in Nairobi.
Okay, but yeah, I mean, Give Directly is pretty well set up for handling that kind of thing. So, like any sort of outside money coming from other places, they do have the infrastructure pretty well in place for being able to do direct cash to people that need it right away. But yeah, I think getting in touch with them, I think would not be. I think you might be the person to do it, actually.
Well, I will. I just want to add.
Just a bit.
I'm sorry.
I was not actually at trying to get the funds there. My angle was in such circumstances, because it's not happening only in Kenya; it's happening also in Brazil. Brazil has also been affected a lot by flooding, and it happened also in Hawaii. Though it was not flooding, it was I think fire. So these occurrences are going to be regular. So my question was, how do we ensure that people are able to overcome such situations when they happen, rather than waiting the governments. And I'm aware, Give Director here, and they can be able to actually organize and send funds to them. But in some cases, we need I think you've gotten my line of thought.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's something I think about a lot, and one of the use cases for Comingle. It's a little harder in a lot of places in Africa. There's less of a established banking system, and so Give Directly has had to do a lot more boots on the ground type stuff to like first develop trust with people, because we're coming in from another country in a place that's been sort of abused before, and also that like setting up a maybe a dollar-backed cryptocurrency on cell phones. There's like a lot of logistical stuff. This goes back to what I was talking about before, where the universality is important, and the fact that it means it'll force us to set up like a federal banking system, or just some sort of system by which we can easily press a button and send money to people, meaning getting everyone a bank account, getting it all connected. Like at the beginning of the pandemic, instead of it taking months and months to, like, once we decided to give people money, to actually get it to them in the form, in a million different forms, you just hit a button and it goes right into their accounts. That's essentially what we're trying to build with Comingle, is an infrastructure that acts as, I like the metaphor of a circulatory system, where every cell in your body gets nutrients because you have little veins and capillaries and everything getting, like, pumping those nutrients regularly to everything. It's sort of a beautiful metaphor in a lot of ways that I won't go too far into. But with Comingle, we're trying to set that up so that, and we're starting in America, so as to be able to take advantage of a pretty robust banking system where people can just sign on to an app. That way, if we have something like things that have happened lately, like the hurricanes coming in and devastating an area, or the wildfires in Maui, if we basically just spin up a small Comingle and locate it in the affected zip codes and allow anyone to join, and then just create a fund where we can say, send money here rather than sending it to Red Cross or whatever, or like wherever. I don't know how the big donations from Oprah and The Rock got distributed or who they went through. A use case for Comingle is, we're going to get 99 cents on every dollar, or like straight to people within the next week. So if we bring in all this money, we can make sure it gets back to the people and proportionally to the people who are most affected. The other use case I like to talk about is Haiti, because it's a very stark one, where Haiti had that big earthquake, I don't remember, 10 years ago. But reading the news articles like a year later, that the Americans donated something like $13 billion, and something like 11 of it couldn't be accounted for, just kind of vanished in smoke and incompetence and corruption or whatever it was. And then the other 2 billion got to people in not very helpful ways, like these in-kind services they didn't need 6 months later. And part of it is the fact that it's hard for any organization to manage that amount of money. If you're managing some pile of money for a population of 1 million people, that's logistically fucking hard, right? It's really hard. Same reason a lot of the Giving Pledge billionaires haven't given away their money. But if you have a system to say, everyone plug in, you're going to get your cut every week, it's just a few lines of code. So throw all this money in there, you'll know it's getting to everyone every week. How much more impactful would it have been if that $13 billion was going straight into the pockets of Haitians? And how many more people would give, given the confidence that, like, oh, we know that this is getting into people's pockets? So for me, it's like building these infrastructures is like building a working circulatory system that allows us to get money to people very, very quickly. And we saw, like, even in our own little basic income pilot, we had someone get hit by Hurricane Florence 6 weeks into their basic income. He had to ride out the last 2 hurricanes that came through his area, which is Hurricane Alley. And for the first time, he was able to evacuate, get way less, suffer way less damage. He was able to recover and rebuild. He was able to, like, also recover when the governmental mechanisms of help fell through. Like, FEMA was a total nightmare. That's the disaster aid organization in the U.S. And he was able to eventually move out. And he had been stuck in this area for years because he never had the money to withstand or evacuate or move away from the hurricanes. And it was this little amount of regular income that finally allowed him to do it for himself.
I'll add to this that there is increased discussion about direct cash, even in advance of disasters around the world in response to climate change. It was actually one of the Nobel Prize winning economists, Esther Duflo, just presented a plan I think it was like a month ago to the G20 that her proposal was to tax like multinational corporations and billionaires around the world to add money to a global climate fund. And the goal of the fund would be to distribute cash, without conditions directly to people, directly to the poorest people in these specific areas, even in advance of something. Like if, we're expecting something to happen, and of course afterwards too, but it's the first time that kind of proposal has been made at something like the G20 to actually just do unconditional cash to people in response to climate change. So it does seem, I don't know if that plan will specifically pass, but there is this increasing popularity of direct cash, not only in response to climate change, but even in advance to help people like escape particular situations.
That's kind of one of my dreams for Comingle too. Is part of the reason we do it on a weekly basis is the way we're setting it up. Is sometimes a hurricane's going to land 5 days before it lands, and within some sort of tolerance. So we could start, if we know a hurricane's going to be like Category 5 hurricane or something when it lands, we can create a fund and have the zip codes that are applicable be pending. People can start donating to that, to the point that where we know the zip codes that are going to be affected, we open eligibility to everyone in those zip codes, and potentially before it even hits, they're starting to get money in their bank account to buy the gas they need to get out of town, or be able to afford to hole up in a motel for a little while. Fast response is crucial.
Yeah, and also to have that in advance, which again is the argument for a permanent unconditional basic income to be always there as a floor, so that it's always there. Because it's one thing, it's great to target people in advance of something, like that something's going to happen, so you get the money just in advance of it. But it's even better so that they already have it, so you're not even like trying to get there.
So anyone in those areas who's already on like the national version of Comingle would be getting that amount of support too, to hopefully help them get out of the way, like just an ongoing permanent thing.
So we are at 2:00 now, but there's just one more thing I really wanted to get in, because it actually kind of ties in, especially to their stuff and its recent news. So we just go like a few minutes late and just kind of mention this, but I feel this is also a good response to those like Scott Galloway. It's a response to progressives, and it looks like the realities of welfare and the advance of technology and where we're going. Okay, so this is, I'll just read from this article here. It talks about something called Samagra Vidika, which is a particular policy, I believe, in India. So this is a technical explainer, was recently released by Amnesty International. Okay, so it says, governments must ensure automated social protection systems are fit for purpose and do not prevent people eligible for welfare from receiving it. Amnesty International said today, as it published a technical explainer on the underlying technology behind Samagra Vidika. The technical explainer sheds light on Samagra Vidika's human rights risks in its use of a technical process called entity resolution, wherein machine learning algorithms are used to merge databases together with the goal of assessing the eligibility of welfare applicants and detecting fraudulent duplicate beneficiaries in social protection programs. Publication of the explainer follows media reports blaming Samagra Vidika for allegedly excluding thousands of people from accessing social protection services, including those related to food security, income, and housing. A 2024 investigation published in Al Jazeera exposed how errors in the system, which consolidates individuals' data from several government databases, led to thousands of families being denied vital benefits, raising serious human rights concerns around their right to Social Security. Automated decision-making systems such as Samagra Vidika are opaque, and they flatten people's lives by reducing the numbers using artificial intelligence and algorithms. So yeah, this is just a great example of like AI is advancing and people are thinking, oh, we can actually target even better. Like we can actually use algorithms to better reach those who we feel are deserving. And of course, the reality of the system is that it can even make things worse, and you exclude even more people that you're trying to include, thanks to trying to get fancy with technology. Whereas, I'm sure maybe someone like Scott Galloway would read something about Samagra Vedika outside of this article and warning and be like, oh, what a great idea. Like we're using AI to like target this. And that's of course going to do a better job of reaching these people that are deserving. But of course, and the reality of it is, hey, if you really want to reach people who are in most need, then you provide something universally, and then you tax away from those who definitely don't need it because they're rich and they have high incomes. Trying to get fancy with automated targeting, not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, we already have the targeting mechanism created, and it works, and it is the only. It's called the IRS, and it's the only people that end up having to wait for the money is the government who can afford to wait for the money, rather than the people waiting to be approved or targeted. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, like universality. Hey, let's just use that. We do not
It
want
works.
to leave people out. Do not worry about Bill Gates getting something. Just tax Bill Gates more. That's it. That's all you need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
All
if
right.
the targeting is being used to target those who are most able to contribute, then yeah, good
Right.
idea.
Target taxes.
Right,
Don't target the benefit. Target the
right.
taxes.
Maybe a way to start presenting it is just UBI is targeted. It's just targeted after the fact, based on income. Like, yeah, I do the if you buy something for $5 and you give them a 20 and you get $15 back, it didn't cost you 20 even though you parted with $20 for a second. It cost you 5. Like we didn't give Bill Gates $1,000. We loaned it to him and then took it back and then some, because it's just a better way to pull off the mechanism. But that's one of those things where we're just gonna have to show people before they'll get it, because it just doesn't compute. Like they can't wrap their brains around it. But like after 1 or 2 iterations of being part of one of these basic incomes, I think they will get it. But we just have to build it.
Yeah, the quick explanation that I like to is, as people know the phrase, I think I don't know where it came from originally, like some Western or multiple Westerns, but, shoot them all and let God sort them out. And, I just like pay them all and let taxes sort them out.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I put that one in my book, but I don't know where the origin of that is. But it's a good explanation.
You see it on a lot of T-shirts.
Yeah, it's a good.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, so yeah, we're at 2:05. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and this recording will eventually be up on the Comingle YouTube channel. There's actually going to be a big batch. Eventually, I think like 7 of the last recent episodes will be up there. So keep an eye on that, and see you all next week, hopefully.